Okay, so welcome to episode 2.1.1 of this copyright class, in which we are going to discuss the most important modern Supreme Court case on copyrightable subject matter, in which the Supreme Court sort of lays out how we are supposed to think about copyrightable subject matter and tells us something essentially about the kind of metaphysics of copyright protection, as it were. And it does so in the context of that most exciting of subjects, the telephone book. So what actually happened in Feist v. Rural, the facts are a little complicated, so I'll lay them out for you in some detail. Essentially, it was a dispute between a telephone company that produced a telephone book and a publisher that published compilations of telephone listings. So Rural Telephone Service Company Incorporated was a rural telephone cooperative that provided telephone service in certain parts of rural Kansas. And you can see the service area of the Rural Telephone Service Company here, scattered among different Kansas counties that didn't have essentially enough people to attract commercial telephone companies. And so rural formed in order to provide telephone service to those people. And it did so for quite some time with a lot of community buy-in. And as part of its monopoly in providing telephone service in the area, it had certain obligations, among which was to provide a telephone directory to all of its subscribers. We think of that normally as the white pages of the telephone book, in which Rural listed the names and telephone numbers of all of its subscribers in alphabetical order, as well as in many cases their addresses. Of course, Rural's telephone book also included the familiar Yellow Pages, which consisted of paid advertisements submitted by local businesses and organized by category, which enabled people to find service providers of various kinds that they might be interested in looking to hire to do a task, or a business to go to, or a restaurant to eat at. You name it, right? The telephone book was like the Google of the pre-internet era, as it were. You want to figure out where to go to eat. Well, you don't go to Yelp or to Uber Eats or whatever. You go to the Yellow Pages and see what it says under restaurants and so on. Okay. So all well and good, right? Rural Telephone Company is providing telephone service, providing telephone directories. It's selling advertisements in the Yellow Pages. Everything's going along swimmingly. And then the Feist publications come along. And what does Feist publications do? Well, Feist essentially produces compilations of telephone directories. So as you can imagine, right, the areas, physical areas served by Rural are quite large, but there aren't that many people there, right? And in rural areas, people often travel long distances in order to find the services that they want. And so they want to have access to people who are in all relevant areas. And of course, the rural service areas were quite broken up as well. So, I mean, there's a lot of space in between there that were people not serviced by Rural Telephone Company, and therefore didn't fall into or didn't appear in the Rural Telephone directory. And yet people who are rural subscribers might want to be able to get in touch with them, or might want to know about businesses in that area, and so on. And this was true in many other rural parts of the country as well. And so what Feist Publications did was produce telephone books that were more useful because they included more of the relevant information that people wanted. And essentially, Feist would fill in all those empty spaces on the rural service map and provide access to subscribers of other telephone companies to rural subscribers, and and vice versa. And how did they do that? Well, they went to the telephone companies and said, hey, we're going to produce this new free telephone book that we're also going to sell Yellow Pages advertising in, and we'd like to license your phone numbers from you, and we'll pay you a tidy sum for you to provide us a list of all your subscribers with their telephone numbers, and then we'll work that into our book, and every year you get the same information, we'll update our book, and so on and so forth, and everything will be hunky-dory. Well, most telephone companies agreed to this proposal because they were monopolists anyway, and they were going to get paid money, and they didn't really see it as that big of a competition because it was a different product, and consumers could productively use both products. Well, rural was the outlier, and rural said no. Right, rural said, we're not going to license our numbers to you. We don't like you. We don't want you doing this stuff, outsider, whatever. We're not going to license our number to you. You're not allowed to use them. If you want to use our subscribers' names and numbers, you're going to have to go out there and collect them yourself. You can't get them from us. Well, that was not working for Feist, and they certainly didn't have the resources to go out and recompile all of this data themselves. And so what did they do instead? Well, they just took the rural telephone book, picked out the numbers of the subscribers who they wanted, stuck those into their book, and figured, well, so, that's the end of it. There's no way for rural to know the difference. After all, we could very well have gone out and collected that information ourselves, and it would have ended up exactly the same. So what are they going to say? How are they going to prove otherwise? Well, rural was onto them. What did rural do? It stuck fake subscribers with fake numbers into its phone book. And so when it looked at the Feist compiled directory, it said, hey, you didn't just copy the real listings, you copied the fake listings too. And the only way you could have gotten those fake listings was by copying them from our telephone directory. You couldn't have gotten them from the real world because they don't exist. We caught you red-handed, copying from our telephone book without our permission. You are infringers. And they brought a copyright infringement action against Feist. Well, it wended its way through the lower courts, and ultimately the Supreme Court said, no, Feist is not an infringer. But the interesting question is, why not? And it happens on two different levels, right? So on one level, the Supreme Court says, look, the original telephone listings, copying the original telephone listings isn't copyright infringement and can't be copyright infringement because telephone listings are just facts about the world, right? It says rural didn't create those listings. Rural just copied them from the world. That is the name of the subscriber and the subscriber's phone number and the subscriber's address. That's just a fact about the world. Rural didn't make that true. They just copied it from the world and put it into their book. Facts about the world can't be the subject of copyright protection because they weren't created by the author. Therefore, they're outside the scope of originality and can't be protected. Okay, but that's not the end of the story. So Feist copying individual listings can't be infringing because the individual listings can't be protectable. But what about the listings in the aggregate, right? So the Supreme Court says, yes, even though facts themselves can't be protected by copyright, a compilation of facts can be protected by copyright, but only insofar as that compilation itself has some original element. And how can a compilation of facts be original? Well, insofar as it has an original selection, arrangement, or ordering of the facts within the compilation. In other words, if you do something in the way that you compile the facts that constitutes an original element, then that original element can be protected. And if that original element is copied, then that's copyright infringement because the selection, ordering, or arrangement was original, and copying that original element can be an infringing use. Okay, so then the Supreme Court had to decide, well, was there an original element in the rural telephone directory that could possibly be infringed? And it said no, right? Why not? Well, it said there's not just one requirement for originality, there's two, right? The element has to be independently created by the author in order to be original for the purpose of copyright protection, but it also has to have some modicum of creativity. Just to dabble, do you? Only a tiny little bit, just enough to make it creative enough to be protectable, but there has to be something. And the Supreme Court said, in the rural telephone directory, there was no originality whatsoever, because putting subscribers' names in alphabetical order is utterly conventional, right? And alphabetical order cannot be an original selection, ordering, or arrangement of ideas. There's no creativity in alphabetical ordering. Therefore, there was nothing in the rural telephone directory with respect to the ordering of the subscribers, which was all that was copied, that could possibly be protected. And therefore, there was nothing for Feist to infringe, and rural's case was dismissed.